In what seems like a move you'd find in one of the great Mafia movies from the 80s, inside sources now confirmed by Reuters indicate that Trump and Musk are reportedly blackmailing Ukraine by threatening to cut off Starlink access unless Ukraine agrees to cede half of its future mineral profits to the US indefinitely. In light of this, it's crucial to explore how Europe can step in to fill the impending void left by the US and Musk in Ukraine, ensuring that Ukraine retains the strength and independence to reject Trump's administration when push comes to shove. I'm Tuomas, a former officer in the Finnish Defense Forces, and today we'll look at what Europe can do to plug the gap in an effort to keep both Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump away from turning Ukraine's brave fighting people into slaves to their wannabe empires. Europe finds itself in a very difficult, albeit quite black and white position. On one hand, some military capabilities donated to Ukraine by the US can be replaced in Europe. On the other, several crucial systems remain irreplaceable. For example, over 30% of the weaponry used by Ukraine's defense forces comes from the US, as noted by Volodymyr Zelensky recently. Certain items simply cannot be sourced from European manufacturers. Patriot air defense missiles and long-range HIMARS ammunition, for instance, are exclusively provided by the US. Meanwhile, large-scale production facilities for alternatives such as the Scalp and Storm Shadow missiles have only just begun expanding. There is also no clear alternative for NASAMS and HARM missiles. Europe can, however, step in and help maintain a lot of the older US equipment given to Ukraine, like the Bradley, M113, and the M777 howitzers. While things may seem rather bleak, it doesn't really need to be. As recently as last week, Ukraine's armed forces came out with statistics showing that 2/3 of all casualties that they inflict on Russia are made with drones. While conventional weaponry is still important, we have to remember that this war has been fought for 3 years, and both sides are essentially very thin on equipment, which makes strike and grenade dropping drones extremely valuable. As we mentioned in our previous video on European drones, Europe does make FPV drones in large numbers, in Lithuania, Latvia, France, Germany and Finland, though with the advent of Elon Musk turning off Starlink, these will either need to be powered via an alternative to Starlink or fiber optic cables. Word from Ukraine is that they've partially prepared for this and are now pumping out more fiber optic drones than normal GPS signal ones. At this moment in time, Ukraine's industry alone produces several 100,000 FPV drones per month, and with cash and parts injection into these projects, Europe could likely boost that number by several 100%. So, on Starlink, what alternative can the actual free world deliver? Starlink's speed is unrivaled, however Europe and Australia does produce some credible alternatives which could be used. First, Europe recently launched its IRIS-2 program, which is already well into its launch phase. While the cover won't be as good as Starlink, word is that several governments are in the testing phase. This program needs to be rushed. We cannot rely on Elon Musk for anything in Europe with how he is behaving. Secondly, there are several smaller satellite internet providers, like SES from Luxembourg, Inmarsat from the United Kingdom, and NBN from Australia. The issue would be to get stable cover. The governments in these 3 countries could theoretically work together to increase cover over Ukraine and pool their receivers into the same signals. All signs point towards Donald Trump stopping all deliveries of weapons support to Ukraine, even though most of the US aid is used to deliver old US hardware and make new equipment in the US. Put mildly, the US has gotten a really big boost to their own industries by aiding Ukraine, but as we've discussed in previous videos, it doesn't seem like Trump thinks about the long-term US economy when making these rash decisions. The European economy could also start doing what the US has been doing since day one. We could send our older equipment to Ukraine and backfill via our own economy rather than waiting for it to be produced and then sending it. The Russian army is essentially broken. It's barely moving against a nation half of Germany or France. There isn't an immediate danger to Europe on the conventional battlefield. Europe likely has 5 to 10 years before Russia is back at any sort of level which could challenge us, and in that time, we should have had the time to backfill our current stockpiles. So, what particular hardware could Europe deliver which would aid Ukraine, if the US pulls military aid. To put it bluntly, Europe isn't really out of first gear. We could still lean much more heavily into our stocks of armored vehicles, with deals like, in example, the CV90 order for Ukraine, which Sweden, Denmark, and the Netherlands is doing. Our industrial output could still increase. In, for example, Germany, one of the big issues in the upcoming election is the rather large unemployment currently plaguing the country. Why not go together as a continent and invest in this manufacturing capability? Say what you will about Germany, but when this industrial sleeping giant gets underway, it can outproduce most countries on the planet. While that may be a challenging thought to some nations in Europe, we're not in 1932. Dealing with the unemployment in Germany would likely also deal with a lot of the base and unhappiness which Elon Musk-supported AfD is thriving on. Meanwhile, Trump's latest calls for Ukraine to hold new elections have stirred further controversy. European leaders have condemned Trump's dictatorial rhetoric. The Finnish president, Norwegian Prime Minister, and Czech President Petr Pavel have all weighed in, highlighting the absurdity of these demands and asserting support for Ukraine's constitution and democratically elected leadership. Meanwhile, while the US has provided Ukraine with approximately $183 billion, Trump's claims of a $500 billion fossil payments remain a non-issue, and ideally Europe should help what's left of sane America realize that the shakedown of Ukraine needs to stop. In summary, if Europe's reliance on American weaponry continues unchecked, across systems ranging from the F-35 to HIMARS and Patriot missiles, it faces not only strategic vulnerability but also a profound loss of autonomy. European and Canadian operators must make these concerns a top agenda item in discussions with the US government. For example, as we discussed in our last video, Canada should reconsider purchasing fighter jets from a nation whose administration has threatened its sovereignty. The broader point is clear. While Europe possesses the capability to develop its own defense solutions, heavy dependence on US systems could undermine its strategic independence. We need to get our behinds into gear, and the aid to Ukraine doesn't need to be big, expensive items. We could further fund FPV projects, cheap long-range drones, and other assets in Ukraine's already impressive local production. Whatever Europe decides to do, it should help give Ukraine confidence to turn down Trump's hardball negotiation tactics. And ideally, a European delegation should be in Zelensky's team whenever Russia and the US tries to push Ukraine into making concessions. We may not have the military might of the US, but we do have both the economic and soft power resources to outgun Russia and make a real dent in the US economy if we want to. Trump and the US would do well to remember that.